as I was reading, one of the things that jumped out immediately to me was you wrote that Charles, his motto was that the secret to longevity is to be creative and always have a project.
He embodied that motto in every way possible. And I feel that he left me with one project. I'm 57 and I'm writing my first book in my second language.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm doing new things completely out of my comfort zone. And that's a project that he left me with. And he learned how to sculpt. He became a sculptor at older age. He learned how to play the piano. He became a playwright. That's something he always wanted to do. He traveled to remote places at almost 90. He would constantly look for things to do that will help him have a reason for tomorrow.
This is the Turn Your Life Around podcast, and I'm the 180 Lady. I've been helping people turn their lives around since 2007 as the founder and CEO of a large mental health company. The purpose of this podcast is to have meaningful conversations with old friends and new friends, everyday people just like you and me, about how they turn their lives around. We'll discuss all things mental health, fitness, finances, relationships, parenting, spirituality, you name it. My hope is that you can take something away that will encourage you today. I'm your host, Sarah Coates. Are you ready to turn your life around? Hello, welcome to today's episode. We are so excited to introduce our friend. She's actually a newer friend of mine. You know, on this podcast, we're having conversations with old friends and new friends. And I'm excited to have a newer friend here on the podcast today to share about her story and some really exciting things that she has coming up. And so I'd like to introduce the audience to our friend Orit Ramler. And she's going to share a little bit about her story. And I'll just let Orit introduce herself because you'll do a way better job than I can.
Thank you so much, and to new friendships.
Yes.
So I'm very touched being here with you and to explore and see where our conversation takes us. So I will tell you a little bit about my story.
Yeah.
I was born in Israel to Argentinian parents. And because of my dad's job, every 2 years, I was living in a different country. And that's a very important part of my story because that's how I collected many stories. And I learned how to listen to those stories. And that's where I developed my passion in understanding that beyond the language that we speak, there is something that we are saying beyond the words that can be cultural, values related, and different stories that make part of our DNA. So I feel that I always collected those stories.
I love that.
Growing up, I learned that I had a passion in education. And I became a learning specialist, and I worked a lot with different needs, and I got my master's degree in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And then 26 years ago, one day my husband decided that he wanted a passport to the world, and we ended up here in Durham, North Carolina. He came for an MBA at Duke, and we only came here for 2 years, and here we are. This is home now. And I started working in the not-for-profit sector, and our kids grew up here. And then one day I stepped down and I decided to become a coach because of all those stories and conversations and personal and professional development. And I did a lot of leadership development as well. I decided to get my certification as a coach. And since then, I started my own company, Make It a Good One, Coaching and Consulting. I believe that Make It a Good One is my motto because life is good if you make it a good one. And I started meeting a lot of people. One of the people that I met while I was in the not-for-profit world was a fascinating man. I loved opening doors to strangers because I was a stranger every time I moved somehow, and I learned the value of community. So I opened this door to welcome someone who walked into our organization, and instantly, regardless of our big age difference, almost 50 years, we clicked and became very good friends because I found him absolutely fascinating. And it was a very enriching intergenerational friendship. I learned a lot from him. I shared my own perspective. And again, we started meeting very often. And one day, he asked me to write his memoir.
Yes. And that is the premise of what we're going to talk about today is your friend and his memoir and then how you took that. So I just wanted to pause for a minute because I think one of the things that you and I have in common is stories. As a therapist myself, I love listening to people's stories. I think that's probably what I love most about being a therapist is having all these different people that I interact with and hearing their stories. And people just have fascinating stories. And so where else, before we jump into what you're currently doing, in your past life, you said you moved around a lot.
Yes.
Where all did you live?
So in Israel, in Costa Rica, El Salvador, Colombia, Ecuador, Argentina, and then in the United States.
And then Durham.
Yes, and then Durham. Yes.
And so your accent, is it Argentinian?
I think it's a mix.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating. When I would go one place, they won't recognize me from that place. But then when I go to another place, they don't recognize me either. So I think it's a mix.
Yes. An eclectic
places.
mix.
Yes.
Lovely.
I believe I'm a citizen of the world.
Oh,
That's how I like to present myself.
That's nice. A citizen of the world. I like that a lot. And so your coaching business is called Make It a Good One.
Yeah.
And you do executive coaching and what else do you do in that company?
I call it personal and professional development, and I do a lot of leadership coaching. I do a lot of executive coaching and career coaching as well.
Oh, that's so great.
Yes.
Okay. So the main reason we're here today is because we're going to talk about your book, The Box of Life. And I can't wait to hear more about how you came to create it. I know you started to share a little bit about your friend. And so let's talk about him.
Okay,
in a good way, of course.
Always. And he was a human. And that's what I loved most about him. He was vulnerable too. And he had his flaws. And he worked with those stories, with those flaws to create something greater, always. So his name is Charles Stern. And Charles one day called me and asked me to write his memoir.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, with this accent, are you sure you want me? You listen to who I am, to my English, everything. And he said, but you get me. And I want you to write. I want the world to know who Charles Stern was. So I realized he wanted to have a conversation. He wanted to share stories. I said, you know what? I will come to you. We'll meet every 2 weeks and you will share stories and we'll see where it takes us. And we started doing that. And then a few months later, he gave me a very heavy card box, all torn. And he said, Orit, you have my life in your hands.
Oh.
And I said, Charles, what's that? He said, go home, open the box, and then you will see. I hugged that box because I have a man's life in my hands. And it was pouring outside. And I was all worried. And I get home, I open the box, and suddenly I feel like it was an archaeological digging, something precious that I had to find and see the pieces and put something together. There were papers, mainly, not objects. Each paper was a story. It was something that was telling me about his values, about his friends, about his family, about the things that he cares. And I started putting those papers together, like a trail of paper. And I realized that I got to know him even before the time, the 10 years that we were friends, since 2002, this was 2010.
Yeah.
And to learn about his world and to reassure where some of the conversations that we were having came from. And that's how the idea of the book came. That's when I called him. I said, Charles, actually, we do have a book. And first I called it The Man in the Box because I found, I was thinking the soul in the box, the man in the box. And then it was The Box of Life because I started thinking, what happens if I start putting my own box? Sarah, what will someone know about you in 100 years if they open your box?
Right.
how much would we know about our neighbors if we saw their boxes? How many unanswered questions that we all have about our ancestors we would have answered? And that's how the concept of the box of life came to life.
I love this. So if the audience, they probably don't know this, but you and I had conversations before today and just learning about how you came to create this idea. I have so many things, so many bullet points as I was reading through your book that, I wanted to talk about. So as I was reading, one of the things that jumped out immediately to me was you wrote that Charles, his motto was that the secret to longevity is to be creative and always have a project. And I told you earlier, but this resonates so deeply with me because my grandmother, she's 92. And she always has a project. I mean, she'll be painting. She was painting our living room one day. I think my mom and her siblings were like, kick down off that ladder. But she delivers meals to people. She crafts these teddy bears out of wedding dresses. I mean, she always has a project. And so when I read that Charles said the secret to longevity is to always have a project, that just resonated so deeply.
He embodied that motto in every way possible. And I feel that he left me with one project, right? At my age, they won't reveal here, but I'm 57 and I'm writing my first book in my second language.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm doing new things completely out of my comfort zone. And that's a project that he left me with. And he learned how to sculpt. He became a sculptor at older age. He learned how to play the piano. He became a playwright. That's something he always wanted to do. He traveled to remote places at almost 90. He would constantly look for things to do that will help him have a reason for tomorrow. And I think having that reason for tomorrow is so important. Life, it's not over until it is.
Yeah.
And we need to live it. And that's about living with purpose, which was also very important to him. And I speak about that a lot in the book.
Yeah. That is one thing I noticed as I was reading it in your book. It lays out all, like, kind of his timeline, autobiography of his projects, of what he was doing. And I was like, oh my goodness, like it kept going. And I'd see that he's getting older, and yet he was still doing some very, very cool things.
He was always reinventing himself, right? And that's the other thing that I learned. And it's so important to know that there are always possibilities to reinvent ourselves and to try new things. We are at the helm of that.
Yeah. That's I think that's a great takeaway right there, is that there's always options and chances. Okay. So you're going through Charles's box. You're learning all his stories through all his papers. Like you said, it wasn't objects, it was papers. I mean, what did he have in there like that were papers? What were the papers?
So he had a speech that his daughter read to him for one of his birthdays, a milestone birthday. He had resignation letters that he wrote, but he also had a few notices of letters letting him go from places. Right? He had his favorite quotes. He had his favorite stories. He had photos. And he wrote what those photos were, which is very important. I will tell you more about that.
Okay.
He had donations, charitable donations that he gave, the letter knowing why he gave to a place and why that was important. He wanted to be in politics, so he ran for different things, and he has all his campaigns. He was very, very opinionated. So there are lots of letters complaining about everything that you can imagine. There were a note from his friends, and there were awards. And there were a few health reports, which is very important to have in our box of life as well.
Right. So he gave you his life in a box, and you're going through it. And then what was the next thing that happened?
So when I realized that the things that were in the box really spoke to his values, to what matters most to him, to how he lived his life, that's when I said, okay, I need to ask other people to start putting their boxes together. I want to see what's in there. So I started doing lots of research, years of research, and I came across life review therapy, which is a very interesting concept, looking backwards into our lives. I started asking people to put their boxes together, among them my parents. So with my dad, it was very interesting. He was diagnosed with the beginning of Parkinson's disease. And we didn't know how we will progress. So, and I really wanted him to spend some time looking into his life. So I offered him the opportunity of putting this box together. And suddenly he got into it. He spent hours opening drawers, because usually we have all our stuff is all over the place.
Yeah.
Attics, basement, drawers. And the beauty of this is that he put it all together in one place. And he comes to me 3 weeks later with a box, a shoebox. And he said, okay, here is my box of life. And I just realized that my life actually was much better than what I was thinking it is today.
That's what he said.
That's what he said.
Yes.
He suddenly got connected again with memories, with adventures, with experiences, with accomplishments, with challenges that he overcame.
Right.
Right. And he realized that his life is much more than the present.
Yes. This is why I love your concept so much. I'm listening to you and hearing this and realizing, because it's therapeutic.
It is.
You know, like you just said, it's a life in review. It's going back and looking through the way you grew, the way you overcame certain challenges, your accomplishments, your struggles, and just kind of capturing all that.
It is fascinating.
Yes, it is.
Because then I had my mom in her box. She had my kids, her grandchildren, her first haircut.
Right.
And photos of them. And she brings a box, half empty, filled with those treasured things for her, but nothing about her. And I said, Mom, I think there is much more to your box. And she said, what, for example? And I said, you were an artist. You are an artist. You traveled. You had amazing recipes that we all love. You have friends. And she said, I didn't realize that. And she went back and she started putting her box together.
Right.
And then I started coaching people to put their boxes, because I realized that sometimes we don't know. People might tell you, my life is not interesting enough.
Yeah.
You know what? Every life is interesting. Or I don't remember. And you don't need to remember everything. Let's start going down memory lane together.
Yeah.
And let's have conversations.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if your memory is exactly what it was. It is how you live your memory.
Mm-hmm. So is this how the boxing movement started?
That's how the boxing movement started.
That is so
people started emailing me, Orit, I'm boxing today a date.
Yeah.
Or I'm boxing today a conversation, a difficult one. Or I'm boxing a moment with my son or with my daughter. And people started sharing memories and boxable moments.
Yes. That is so very cool. So, okay. So you have Charles's box, and then you're unboxing it or going through it with him. I mean, what happened after that?
So once I started putting all the stories together, and he said, okay, this is the book. I got busy with life. I was doing all this research. My dad was in hospice. Time went by. At one point, Charles called me to say his goodbyes. And I come see him. And I asked him, but Charles, what's your next project? Instead of being there with him at the moment, I needed him to tell me that he had the next project. Yeah. And he told me, a project that can't be finished is not a project. My project is in you. You have a project for me. And that's when I knew I need to write this book.
Yes. And so that became the project.
And that became the project. I called Charles' daughter, Aina, who now I believe she's a very, very close and dear friend, thanks to Charles.
Yeah.
And I told her, I have this box. and I want you to give me the blessing. I'm ready to write about it. And she knew about that. She found a few things in Charles Wisman labeled for Orit, and with more stories and things. And I started writing the book.
And that is how the book, The Box of Life, came to be. A guide to living with purpose and preserving what matters most. This is so great.
And I want to add that preserving what matters most is because somehow we are like art exhibits and curators of our life. If I ask you, tell me about your life, you won't tell me from the day you were born until today.
Right.
Right? You will choose what you're telling me. And that's part of the beauty of this, is helping us understand, okay, what really matters to us? Who am I? Let's answer that question. It sounds like a very simple question, and yet it's so complex. It has so many layers. And it is so important to connect with that. Who am I? Right. How I'm living my life? What matters most to me?
It makes me think about you when you mentioned that your mom put her box together and it sounded like it was external. It was her children, her grandchildren, their things, their accomplishments. And she hadn't initially put her identity in there, right? And then she kind of maybe went back.
Yeah. And it was a very important part of her identity because she is a mother. She is a grandmother. She was a wife more than anything else. Yeah. And yet there is so much to it. And I think she was such a great everything because of what she brought to it. Right? Her art and her love and her passions. And that's part of who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I took some notes. I jotted down some of I highlighted. There was something in here that you had said that someone reminded you that we die twice. I highlighted this. We die twice. The first time is when we take our last breath, and the second time is when we are forgotten. And that was so powerful, that statement to me, and it made me realize that's why the box of life is important. So we're not forgotten. The legacy lives on.
The legacy lives on, and it's the best gift we can give someone. Somehow, when we die, we have one box, an urn, a coffin, and there are so many things that are not preserved. And the box of life is something that can inform, guide, teach generations to come as well. And there are so many stories that we need to learn to pay attention to. I know we need to live our own experiences, but it's very important. I believe in history and listening to what happened before our time here.
Right.
As something that is very important, and to preserve the things that brought us here to help us know how we are moving forward as a society, as a family, as an individual. Roots are very important where we come from.
Yeah, for sure. And so, okay, so now what are you doing now that you've written the book? What is the next step for you?
The next step is to keep coaching and helping people put their books together, hopefully inspire others to start early on, even when they start a new family, because if not, again, everything goes into boxes, many drawers, and let's preserve what matters most. I started the box for my kids when I started working on this, and I gave each one of them their boxes with the things that I kept for them. And it might be a note from a teacher that really meant something special about them, their first picture, and a note from a friend that they got, the things that we keep for them. And I told them, okay, now it's up to you to keep going with this project. But my goal is to inspire people to box, to think every day how they're living their lives, what they're putting in that box, what they want to preserve, and to live with purpose. I somehow reconnect with purpose. And this is for younger generations and for people who want to leave a legacy. For younger generations, they're not thinking about a legacy yet. And I understand that. They need to be in the moment. They don't know the meaning of being vulnerable. Right. And it's okay. It has its
timing.
It's timing, yes. And yet, I feel that putting your box together helps people learn about another dimension of human being. It's not social media, right? Where you only see one dimension.
Yeah.
And that is causing a lot of pain for many people.
Well, it's all the social media, what people put on it, and I'm guilty of the same, is the good stuff, the highlight reels. I'm not putting the rejections or the firings or the troubling conversations on social media. I'm just putting the good stuff.
Yes.
And like you said, Charles had some rejection letters or some firing letters or resignations in his box.
It was a human box, not a superhero.
Yes.
And I believe that we all need to start connecting more with that, speaking about our vulnerabilities. And so my goal is really to help people share those stories. I hope everyone reads the book. And I always say, if I touch one life,
yes,
my goal is completed.
Yes, help people instill and find purpose. Yes. I think that's what a lot of young people are seeking these days, is what is the purpose of this life we're living, and finding purpose for their own specific lives or personal lives.
It's so important, because if not, someone else will come and tell you about your purpose.
Yes.
And that's very dangerous in many ways. So people are finding purpose, sometimes not in the right thing, just to belong to something, to a movement, to a cause, not really connecting with their own values.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing a lot of keynote speaking engagement, working with teams, companies, and individuals putting their boxes, and parents who are giving the graduation gift for their kids to think about, okay, how was my college experience? What goes in my book? What I want for the future? Because one of the things about looking into the past, it's not only to live the present with purpose, but it helps us plan for the future. Without memory, there is no planning for the future.
Yeah, without memory, there's no planning for the future. Wow. Yeah, I'm just chewing on that for a moment. That's good. That's good. And so you have a book signing coming up. Tell us about that.
June 23rd at McIntyre's Books, which is in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, from 2 to 5. We have an open house celebration and signing for the book.
Yes. Is this the book launch?
The book official launch is July 9th. Okay, so July 9th, it will be available. Now it's for pre-orders, but there will be books in McIntyre. They have advanced copies.
Yeah.
So there will be books there. And I'm very, very excited for the conversation. There will be some fun activities. So the whole idea is to invite people to have insights on their lives, on what really matters most to them.
Yes. And so everyone's invited to the June 23rd book signing. You can have this famous author sign your book if you purchase it. Very, very cool. And so then the book launches on the 9th officially of July, and people can order it, I assume, wherever they order books.
Yes, they can order wherever to order. They can start pre-ordering today.
Nice. We'll put some links in the show notes.
Thank you.
So what are some of, or maybe one of your biggest takeaways? I mean, this whole experience, it sounds like it was over a decade of you meeting and knowing Charles, writing the memoir, putting his box together, all the things, writing this book. What is the biggest takeaway from this whole experience for you?
That's a beautiful question that I'm asked very often, and it is hard for me to say to just have one because, as I always say, there are so many answers. It's not this or that.
Yeah.
So from different standpoints, from a personal standpoint, friendship, right, intergenerational friendship, I think it's enriching, important. It really changed my life, and having a conversation with someone who was a stranger, and see what happened after that. So really to open doors, to speak to people, to engage. Friendship, first takeaway.
Yeah.
Then not being afraid of leaving our comfort zone. Writing a book in English, completely out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And so fulfilling, so enriching, and expanded my comfort zone now, right?
Yeah.
So having a project, things that challenge us, trying new things, very important.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I'm really taking from this is really the thought of how I'm living my life.
Mm-hmm.
When I was writing about this, it really impacted my own life. It was not just a theory or a concept.
Right.
It is something that helped me think every single day and think and also ask others and understand that there is always another dimension to every human being, something deeper than what we see. When we get frustrated with someone or when we say, oh, this person looks very unhappy, think about what that person is carrying with them.
Yeah.
Always explore, always open a door. There is always something else to what we see.
Mm-hmm. I really am reading between your words and hearing you say that connection is just so important in this life, and getting out of your comfort zone, taking the next step to talk with a stranger, look past someone's just their face and know them deeper and really get to connect with them.
100%.
That's what the world is missing, I think, is just this. It's like people want to connect. They do it and they try to do that through social media, but it's so surfacey. It's not real, authentic connection. And I think what humans, especially these days, are longing for is like authentic connection with people.
100%. Active listening, which is something we forgot about many times. And connecting, but not connecting, as you said, at the surface.
Yeah.
Connecting with something deeper. That's always was a value for me, very, very important.
Right.
And I think we need a reminder of that. And we need to teach how to do that.
Yeah.
We can't expect everyone to know that there is something else that you need to look for, that you need to seek for, actively seek for.
Yeah. Yeah, connection. Hopefully this challenges and inspires people to connect with someone today, this week, maybe someone they don't know, maybe a stranger, and who knows, they might find a Charles in their inner circle or, outside of their circle and develop a friendship.
I hope everyone has a Charles.
That's so great.
And that you open your heart for a Charles.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm so glad you wrote this book. Thank you for sending me a copy before other people might have been able to purchase theirs. I enjoyed reading it. Really enjoyed learning about this idea of boxing, the boxing movement, and, just collecting memories and putting them in this box so that others can know who I was, not just what they saw on social media or maybe, like you said, maybe not just a story that someone else shared, but like what was important to me and the legacy I'm leaving. So,
yeah, really having your voice heard. And I think that's what this box allows for. It's not just what people remember about us, what we want them to remember about us. What's our message? And I want to clarify something else. When I mentioned that Charles had only paper in his box, but he had a photograph of a beautiful object, like he was a sculptor. So, for example, he had a photo of his sculpture and he wrote a story about that. But then when I started coaching, one person came to me, one client, and she said, I have this beautiful vase centerpiece that has a story, a family story from my parents. And I love that because it means so much to me. But I'm sure my daughter and my granddaughter also, they don't want it because it's not their taste. But the story matters. So she decided to write the story of that centerpiece. And now that centerpiece, believe me, it will stay in the family forever.
Yes, because it has a story.
Because it has a story. Yes. So stories are what matter. Yeah. So even if we have things that we want to preserve, objects, it's very important to have a story attached to it. And I'm partnering with a great company and we're doing all of that also digital. So people can share between families their box of life. Nice. So if you have a beautiful object or a piece of paper, anything that you want to digitalize for your box of life, you're able to do that.
That is awesome. Look, I don't know if you have this planned, but I can see you like on a stage leading these big seminars, teaching people how to put their boxes together.
that.
I hope that's on your agenda.
100%. I'm starting soon with workshops.
Are you?
And,
That's
yes,
so great.
Yes.
That is so
That's
great.
all in my agenda.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing today and sharing about the Box of Life. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for sharing Charles' story. I feel like after I read through this, I know a little bit more about him and who he was and can put a face to a name kind of thing. So I know his family is very thankful to you for also sharing his memoir.
I really appreciate the opportunity to let the world know who Charles Stern was and is in many ways, and about his Box of Life, and the opportunity to have everyone start living with purpose and preserving what matters most.
Thank you, Orit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you're available, I know that Orit would love for you to come to her June 23rd book signing. And of course, we'll put some links in the show notes so you can order your book on July 9th when it launches. You are not going to want to miss this. Trust me. I read this on a rainy day, read it all in one day. It was very capturing and very, very great. So also wanted to say, if you have enjoyed what you're listening to on the podcast today or other episodes, be sure to give us a like and a follow, subscribe, download, all those cool things so that you never miss an episode. And thanks again for listening.